thick forests of Roanoke Island hide a secret that has baffled historians and ghost hunters for centuries. In the late 16th century, a group of English settlers arrived on these shores with dreams of a new life, but they found only darkness and despair. The air hangs heavy here, as if the land itself remembers the terror that unfolded so long ago. Visitors often report a sensation of being watched from the tree line, where shadows seem to move on their own. This is not just a story of failed colonization, but a chilling tale of disappearance and the supernatural forces that may guard the truth. The mystery of the lost colony remains the oldest unsolvable riddle in American history. Imagine standing on the edge of a wilderness where over 100 souls simply ceased to exist without leaving a single body behind. The silence of the woods is deceptive because it masks the screams that must have echoed here centuries ago. It is a place where history bleeds into folklore, and the spirits of the lost are said to wander eternally. The ground beneath the ancient live oaks is soaked in a mystery that refuses to be buried. Many believe that the settlers did not just die, but were taken by something far more sinister than disease or famine. The story begins with hope, but ends in a silence so profound it chills the blood. The year was 1587, when John White led over 100 men, women, and children to the New World to establish the city of Raleigh. They were not soldiers, but families looking for a fresh start in a land of promise. Among them was the heavily pregnant daughter of John White named Dare, who would soon give birth to the first English child born in America. They arrived at Roanoke Island with high spirits, but the land was already scarred by previous failures and hostile encounters. The unsettling atmosphere of the island seemed to reject them from the moment they set foot on the sandy soil. Unseen eyes watched them from the dense tree line, waiting for the right moment to strike. Supplies ran low quickly, and the settlers realized they were ill prepared for the harsh realities of this untamed wilderness. The local tribes were wary, and tensions simmered just beneath the surface, like a pot about to boil over. Fear began to take root in the hearts of the colonists as the nights grew longer, and the strange sounds of the forest kept them awake. They begged John White to return to England to fetch reinforcements and supplies before it was too late. He was reluctant to leave his family and his newborn granddaughter, Virginia Dare, but he knew their survival depended on it. He promised to return quickly, not knowing fate had other plans. John White boarded a ship back to England, leaving his family and the colonists alone on the edge of the known world. As his ship pulled away from the shore, he looked back at the small settlement surrounded by the vast, menacing forest. He felt a knot of dread in his stomach, a premonition that he was making a terrible mistake. The ocean voyage was long and treacherous, but the true horror lay in the timing of his arrival in England. War had broken out with Spain, and every available ship was commandeered to fight the Spanish Armada. John White was trapped in England, unable to return to his desperate family. For 3 long years, John White was forced to wait, while his family remained stranded across the ocean. Every night, he was haunted by nightmares of the colony, perishing in flames, or being swallowed by the wilderness. He imagined his daughter Eleanor calling out to him for help, while the darkness closed in around her. The guilt ate away at him as the seasons changed, and the years dragged on without any word from the New World. He knew that supplies would have run out long ago, and that the settlers were at the mercy of the elements and the indigenous people. The silence from across the Atlantic was deafening. Finally, in 1590, John White secured passage on a privateer ship bound for the Caribbean, and then North America. His heart pounded with a mix of hope and terror. As the familiar coastline came into view, he strained his eyes against the salt spray, searching for the smoke of cooking fires that would signal life. But the horizon remained clear, and the sky was devoid of any sign of human habitation. The approach to the island was difficult, as treacherous currents and sandbars seemed to conspire to keep him away. It was as if the island itself was trying to prevent him from discovering the truth. The crew anchored off the coast and prepared small boats to go ashore, but the mood was somber and tense. A sudden storm blew in with violent winds and crashing waves that capsized one of the boats, drowning 7 men, including the captain. The sailors took this as a bad omen, believing the island was cursed and demanding to turn back. John White pleaded with them to continue, driven by the desperation of a father and grandfather. They finally agreed to make one attempt to land. As the sun began to set, casting long, eerie shadows across the water, the darkness was falling fast. John White and the remaining crew stepped onto the sandy beach of Roanoke Island. As night fully descended upon them, they sounded a trumpet and sang familiar English songs, hoping to hear a response from the darkness. Their voices echoed strangely against the wall of trees, but no answering call came back to them. The only sound was the wind howling through the branches and the rhythmic crashing of the waves. The silence was heavy and unnatural, causing the hair on the back of their necks to stand up. It felt as though the entire island was holding its breath, waiting for them to venture deeper. They made their way toward the site of the settlement, guided by the pale light of the moon. The forest felt alive around them, with unseen movement and the snapping of twigs that sounded like footsteps. John White called out the names of his daughter and granddaughter, but his voice was swallowed by the vast emptiness. The path was overgrown with weeds and vines, suggesting that no one had walked it for a very long time. Every shadow looked like a lurking figure, and every rustle of leaves sounded like a whisper. The sense of dread grew with every step they took toward the clearing. When they finally reached the location of the colony, John White stopped dead in his tracks. The houses he had helped build were gone dismantled and removed as if they had never been there. A tall wooden palisade wall had been erected around the perimeter of the site, which was not there when he left. The moonlight illuminated the fortification, giving it the appearance of a ghostly fortress standing guard over nothing. There was no sign of a struggle or a battle, and no charred remains of fire. It was simply empty. John White moved closer to the wooden wall, his hands trembling as he held up a lantern. Carved into a sturdy post near the entrance was a single word that would become legendary: Croatoan. The letters were etched deep into the wood, without any sign of distress or haste. Before he left, White had instructed the colonists to carve a cross if they were forced to leave in danger. He searched frantically for the cross, but found nothing. The lack of the distress signal gave him a flicker of hope, but the emptiness of the settlement crushed his spirit. Inside the palisade, the scene was even more unsettling than the lack of people. Heavy iron cannons and bars of pig iron were left behind, overgrown with grass and moss. These were valuable items that settlers would not have abandoned lightly if they were moving to a new location in an orderly fashion. Chests that had been buried for safekeeping had been dug up and ransacked, with books and maps torn and scattered by the wind. It looked as though the earth itself had rejected their belongings and spat them back out. The chaotic scene hinted at a sudden and frantic departure, or perhaps something worse. John White found 3 of his own chests among the ruins, which had been broken open and looted. His armor was rusted through, and the frame of a portrait of his daughter was empty. Seeing his personal items destroyed brought the reality of the situation crashing down on him. The items were not just stolen, they were desecrated, as if to erase the memory of the English presence. The rain began to fall, washing the dirt from the scattered possessions and making them look like bones bleaching in the moonlight. He stood amidst the ruins of his life, feeling the weight of total failure. The crew was anxious to leave, fearing the indigenous people or the strange atmosphere of the place. They urged John White to return to the ship before the storm worsened, but he lingered, hoping for a sign. He walked the perimeter of the palisade, looking for footprints or trails, but the weather had washed everything away. The word Croatoan suggested they had gone to the island of that name to live with the friendly tribe there, but without a boat or supplies. How could over 100 people move there safely? The logic did not hold up against the eerie silence. As John White stood in the center of the abandoned settlement, he felt a sudden drop in temperature. The wind seemed to whisper the name Virginia in his ear, sending a shiver down his spine. He spun around, expecting to see his granddaughter, but there was only the dark forest staring back at him. The crewmen reported seeing lights moving in the woods where no lights should be. Panic began to set in among the sailors, who were convinced that the spirits of the dead were watching them. They practically dragged John White back to the boats, leaving the mystery behind. The storm that had been brewing unleashed its full fury as they rowed back to the ship. Thunder shook the heavens, and lightning illuminated the terrified faces of the men. It was as if the island was screaming at them, driving them away with the wrath of nature itself. They barely made it back to the ship alive, losing an anchor and snapping cables in the process. The captain decided they could not stay any longer and ordered the ship to set sail for the Caribbean. John White pleaded for one more day to search Croatoan Island, but his cries were drowned out by the storm. The ship sailed away, leaving the mystery of the lost colony of Roanoke behind in the mist. John White never returned to America, and he died in Ireland 3 years later, a broken man. He never knew the fate of his daughter or his granddaughter, Virginia Dare. The image of the abandoned settlement and the word Croatoan haunted his every waking moment. He carried the guilt of their disappearance to his grave, wondering if they had waited for him until the bitter end. The story of their vanishing became a legend whispered by sailors and settlers who followed. Years later, when other English settlers arrived at Jamestown, they heard rumors of the lost colonists. Indigenous people told stories of men who dressed like the English and lived in stone houses. There were reports of fair-skinned people with gray eyes living among the tribes in the interior. Some claimed the colonists had been slaughtered by the powerful chief, Powhatan, just days before the Jamestown settlers arrived. These rumors were never confirmed, and no concrete evidence was ever found. The fate of the Roanoke settlers remained a dark cloud over the early history of the colonies. One of the most chilling legends to emerge from the mystery is the tale of the White Doe. According to folklore, Virginia Dare did not die, but grew up among the Native Americans. A sorcerer who desired her transformed her into a snow-white doe when she refused his advances. It is said that she roams the forests of Roanoke to this day, a ghostly figure appearing before disaster strikes. Hunters who tried to shoot the white doe found that their arrows passed right through her. The legend says she can only be killed by a silver arrow, a tragic end for the first English child. Archaeologists have spent decades digging in the soil of Roanoke and nearby sites, searching for clues. They have found Elizabethan pottery and metal objects mixed with Native American artifacts, suggesting some contact. However, they have never found a mass grave or the remains of the colony structures themselves. It is as if the earth swallowed the buildings whole, leaving only scattered debris. Recent discoveries on Hatteras Island, formerly Croatoan, suggest some survivors may have assimilated there, but the lack of a definitive answer keeps the ghosts of Roanoke alive in the public imagination. Another theory suggests that the colonists fell victim to a Spanish raid from Florida. The Spanish were ruthless in protecting their claim to the New World and had wiped out other settlements. Yet Spanish records from the time show no evidence of a raid on Roanoke during those years. This leaves the possibility of disease or starvation, but neither explains the lack of bodies. If they had died of natural causes, there would be graves marked with crosses, as was the custom. The absence of burial sites points to a more chaotic or supernatural end. Then there are the Dare stones, a series of rocks found in the 1930s, carved with messages. The first stone discovered in a swamp appeared to be a grave marker written by a leaner Dare. It claimed that John White departed, leaving them to misery, and that nearly all were killed by savages. The stone detailed the death of Virginia Dare and her father, Ananias, initially hailed as a breakthrough. The stones were later dismissed by many as hoaxes. However, recent analysis has led some experts to believe the first stone might be authentic, adding a grim chapter to the story. The text on the first Dare stone describes a massacre and a frantic escape into the interior. It speaks of sickness and war, listing the names of the dead with chilling precision. If it is real, it paints a picture of a desperate woman carving her final testament into rock. Imagine a leaner Dare hiding in the swamp, listening to the screams of her friends and family. The stone is a cry from the grave, a message in a bottle thrown into the sea of time. Whether real or fake, it captures the horror that likely befell the lost colonists. There are those who believe the land itself is cursed by ancient entities that predated the tribes. Indigenous legends speak of spirits that could mimic human voices and lure people into the woods. The colonists, alone and frightened, would have been easy prey for such malevolent forces. Perhaps the word Croatoan was not a destination, but a warning or the name of a deity. The forests of North Carolina are dense and unforgiving, capable of hiding anything. Even today, people vanish in these woods without a trace. Paranormal investigators have flocked to the Fort Raleigh National Historic Site for decades. They record strange electronic voice phenomena and capture unexplained orbs in photographs. Visitors report sudden cold spots on warm summer days and the feeling of being touched by unseen hands. Some claim to hear the laughter of children or the sobbing of a woman near the reconstructed earthworks. The energy at the site is undeniable, a heavy blanket of sadness that suppresses the sounds of the modern world. The ghosts of Roanoke are not resting in peace. The woods surrounding the site are twisted and gnarly with live oaks that look like reaching claws. Spanish moss drapes from the branches like tattered shrouds swaying in the breeze. At night, the darkness is absolute, and the silence is broken only by the sounds of nocturnal creatures. It is easy to imagine the terror of the colonists as they sat in their dark houses, listening to the forest. Every snap of a twig could have been a friend returning or a foe approaching. The psychological toll of the isolation must have been devastating. One particularly disturbing theory involves a phenomenon known as mass hysteria or madness. Cut off from civilization and facing starvation, the social order of the colony could have collapsed. Paranoia and fear might have turned neighbor against neighbor, leading to violence within the walls. In this scenario, the colonists did not vanish, but destroyed themselves from the inside out. The survivors may have fled into the woods to escape the madness, only to die of exposure. This theory makes the lack of bodies even more puzzling and terrifying. The legend of the lost colony has inspired countless books, movies, and nightmares. It taps into our primal fear of the unknown and the fragility of civilization. We like to think that we can tame the wild, but Roanoke is a reminder that the wild can swallow us whole. The story is a scar on the history of exploration, a wound that has never healed. It serves as a warning that some places are best left alone. The ambition of the empire collided with the ancient power of the land, and the land won. As the sun sets over Roanoke Sound, today, the water turns a blood-red color, reflecting the dying light. The tourists leave, and the park rangers lock the gates, leaving the site to the shadows. If you listen closely, you might hear the faint sound of a lullaby drifting on the wind. It is the song of a mother comforting a child who will never grow up. The mystery of the lost colony of Roanoke will likely never be solved. The dead keep their secrets well, but the dread lingers long after you leave the island. It follows you home, a subtle reminder that there are things in this world we cannot explain. The faces of the 115 men, women, and children seem to stare out from the history books, pleading for answers. They are the lost, the vanished, the forgotten souls of a failed dream. Their disappearance is a void that absorbs all theories and yields no truth. Until the earth gives up its dead, Roanoke will remain a haunted place. So the next time you find yourself in a deep forest and the silence becomes too heavy, remember Roanoke. Remember that entire communities can vanish into thin air, leaving only a carved word behind. Remember that the line between history and horror is razor thin. The trees are watching, and the wind is listening. And somewhere out there in the dark, the answer to the mystery is waiting. But be careful what you search for, because you might just find it.